As the article Allegro 3 to Stand On states, science is a human endeavor and is backed up by evidence, not faith or logic. The citizen science lesson addresses the nature of science by showing students that people all around the world of various ages and races can contribute to scientific data through participation in a variety of citizen science projects. In the formative assessment lesson, my students gave evidence to support their claims about force and motion. In both lessons, students were able to recognize that data changed as more time, information, or factors were added. For example, in the citizen science lesson, students were able to observe the changes their caterpillars made over time. Students observed the caterpillar stage, pupa or chrysalis stage, and the butterfly stage. In the formative assessment lesson, students tested different types of force and motion and tested using a variety of surfaces, for example, the tile, the carpet, or sandpaper. Throughout both lessons, the nature of science was clearly evident through the first-hand experiences and observations that the students had. Students participated in scientific discourse and collaborated to identify claims and evidence. The lessons made it evident to students that science is a way of explaining the natural world and natural phenomena. In second grade, my students are between Piaget's pre-operational and concrete operational stages of development. In the citizen science lesson, students had the opportunity to physically take pictures of the butterflies in their various life stages. In the concrete operational stage, children can think logically about concrete events. Both the citizen science lesson and the formative assessment lesson permit students to physically interact with data and understand cause and effect relationships, allowing them to think logically about the data they are collecting. The formative assessment lesson, Explore phase, provided students with various concrete experiences to enhance their understanding. Pre-operational students are able to see, decide, and report. This aspect of pre-operational thinking is evident in both of my lessons through the data collected by the students. Concrete operational thinkers are able to classify based on the concrete experiences they have. They have to actually deal with reality and gather data for themselves. My students took part in concrete data gathering in both lessons. Throughout both of my lessons, I used a variety of formative and summative assessment techniques, which allowed me to gauge student understanding and guide instruction. As Paige Keeley states, these techniques are used to engage students in thinking deeply about their ideas in science, uncover the pre-existing ideas students bring to their learning that can be used as starting points to build upon during instruction, and help teachers and students determine how well individuals in the class are progressing towards developing scientific understanding. For my citizen science lesson, I used a variety of assessment techniques in each phase of my 5E lesson. In the Engage phase, I had students complete an I think, we think chart to identify their prior knowledge of butterflies. In the Explore phase, students used the Partner Speaks fact to share with their elbow partners findings in the butterfly garden. An explanation analysis took place in the Explain phase of the lesson as students presented their findings to answer the explorable question. I also used the facts Think, Pair, Share, I used to think but now I know, and sequencing. For my formative assessment lesson on force and motion, I began with a probe from Keeley's book, Uncovering Ideas in Primary Science. The students were given the marble roll probe and asked to check the box as to how they thought the marble would roll onto the floor. I administered this probe at the beginning of the lesson. I collected the student data and compiled it to make a graphical representation. Pre-lesson, many of my students had misconceptions about motion. 14 students thought the marble would roll curved, 3 thought zigzag, and 3 thought straight. This data allowed me to create a lesson that would allow students to experience various types of force and motion. I re-administered the probe post-lesson, and all but 3 of my students correctly answered that the marble would roll straight. They were able to explain concepts to me using scientific language and evidence. For the citizen science lesson, my students reacted very well. They really enjoyed watching the butterflies go through their life cycle, and they thought it was cool that they got to contribute real scientific data on the Citizen Science website. My cooperating teacher loved the use of the SciStarter website and wants to use it in the future. My students loved the formative assessment lesson. The stations that they got to experience were unlike any science that they had ever done in class. My cooperating teacher liked the use of a pre- and post-lesson probe. Overall, I think both lessons went very well. The kids loved the hands-on data collection. For the citizen science lesson, I would change it to where it takes place over more time. For the formative assessment, I would add in more stations for experiencing motion and force. I loved teaching both lessons, and it was great to practice for me. I still need to work on time management and classroom management. At the end of citizen science, we released the butterflies. We had one butterfly fatality by shoe, so we had a class funeral to mourn the little friend. I loved teaching science this semester, and I can't wait for my experience in student teaching.
3.